Hello, everyone. I'm going to make sure that my audio is on to make sure we're all good. Looks like it is. All right, great. My name is Donovan. I'm a financial advisor here at Larson Financial Group. I want to take a second to thank all of you for registering and attending tonight. This is my second one of these, and funny enough, the last time I did this presentation, 3 days later, they came out with a new legislation. So automatically I had to add a couple slides in to update that. Now, the legislation hasn't gone through yet. It's still in the works. So some things might happen, some things might not. I'll talk about what is proposed here at the tail end of the conversation. Today, what I'm going to talk about, the basis of today's conversation is, does a Roth conversion make sense for me, and indicating factors of if it does make sense for you. So the big thing that it comes into, does it make sense, is really into your specific details. So the best way for me to give a really insightful response to that question is to take a look at your situation to see if it makes most sense. Now, I want to educate everyone on this presentation to give a good temperature check to see if it makes sense for them, but ultimately you need to talk with a financial professional to see if it makes sense. The next thing I'm going to talk about is controlling your tax bracket with Roth dollars. I'll get into that a little bit later, but basically when we're getting into retirement, we want to be able to decide on how much taxes we're having to pay, and the only way to be able to do that is your percentage of Roth dollars. The third thing I'm going to cover is Roth conversion pitfalls. So how do I mess up a Roth conversion? I get calls quite frequently saying, hey, Dylan, I messed it up. I did a backdoor Roth incorrectly, or I converted a Roth IRA at the wrong time for me. How can I fix it? So I'll go through a couple of those situations. Next, I'm going to talk about that proposed legislation. Like I said, it's not through yet. I have some speculative thought processes to see if I think it's going to, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. And then finally, some people had some questions that they submitted whenever they registered for the webinar, so I want to make sure to get to those. And then some new questions and answers that you might have from the presentation. So first and foremost, I want to kind of see if everybody's familiar with GoToMeeting. So there is a questions tab that you can type in a question that I can see on my screen, and there's also a chat feature. So you can use either one of those to ask me questions real time. And I know some questions are going to be really, really brief, and so if that's the questions, I will answer those if it makes sense to answer them then, and if not, then I'll wait till the end to give you kind of a more a deep answer. Great. So when did Roth dollars start? So the Roth IRA came about from the Taxpayer Relief Act in 1997. Okay, so they were looking at saving monies in qualified plans, and really you only had your 401k or a pension at that point. And there are good things about those things, but the bad thing about those things is that how they're taxed. So they're taxed up front, they grow tax deferred, and they come out tax free. And that's a very desirable taxation strategy. And because it's an ideal taxation, they put rules on them. You know, it started with William Roth, who was the senator from Delaware who came up with this idea, but he also came up with the rules associated with them. So the rules associated with these Roth IRAs is that there's a limit on how much you can put per year, which is $6,000 in 2021. That number might pop up next year. Not so sure yet. So that number, and then also there's income limits on who can contribute directly into a Roth IRA. For a single tax filer, that's right around 120,000. For our married folks, it's right above 205. If our adjusted gross income is above those numbers, we cannot directly contribute into a Roth IRA, which that brought the backdoor Roth IRA. The backdoor Roth IRA is just a tax loophole that allows us to put non-deductible dollars in a traditional IRA. So we're not getting those tax breaks. And then at the end of the year, we convert them over, we roll them over into a Roth IRA, which then grow tax-free, come out tax-free, the ideal structure. Just like anything, if you find the loophole in the IRS tax code, you're going to be able to do it. So the next thing that I wanted to talk about, and I saw a question come in, it's a pretty long one, so I think I'm going to wait till the end if that's okay. I'll get to that one. So the big topic of today, and the majority of the questions that I get are, Dylan, should I convert it? And it really comes down to a couple different things. I want to take a look at your current tax bracket versus your estimated future tax bracket. Okay, so your current tax bracket makes me and my wife are making so much money. That puts us in X tax bracket. If we think that we're going to move up in the corporation, or we're going to grow our business, or whatever that may be, our tax dollars are going to be higher later. We're going to be in a higher tax bracket. So I want to take a look at my client's current tax bracket versus future tax bracket. Because if we have a future higher tax, we want to convert those dollars now. So we'll save less. We'll spend the money now, and whenever we take them out in retirement, they'll be lower tax. They won't be taxed. The next thing we look at is the future tax bracket outlook. Now, historically, we are in a very low tax environment, and we're already in talks of raising taxes and all of those things. And because of Social Security and all of these government programs, taxes are going to need to go up. It's really just a math problem, right? If we don't have the dollars and we're in debt, we need to increase the revenue, and the only way the United States increases revenue is to raise taxes, right? It's just how the world, or how the United States works. So if we're looking at the raise of taxes and your future tax bracket, that means that not only will you yourself be in a higher tax bracket, but those brackets will actually be higher as well. So if we can get some future dollars that are untaxable, that is the preferred method. The third thing, and this is where I spend the majority of my time with my clients with, is the percentage of pre-tax dollars. Okay, so the percentage of pre-tax qualified dollars. So a lot of the times my clients do the job that they're supposed to do. They go to work, they save money into their 401k. Hopefully they get to a spot where they're maxing out that 401k. And then they get real close to retirement, 5, 6, 7, 10 years out of retirement, and they're looking great. The biggest thing is that they have this giant pot of money that is all going to be taxed. It's all going to be taxed to be able to take it out. So what I do for my clients is I take a look at your percentage of pre-tax dollars, pre-tax qualified dollars, and I want them to start to go over to the Roth side. And I'll get into controlling your tax bracket a little bit later, but that's where that calculation comes into play. The next thing that I look for is estate planning. So estate planning is something that really takes into account those taxable dollars. So if you pass down taxable dollars, and I'll get into this a little bit later, but the taxable dollars are going to be attached to your beneficiaries, and if that brings them up into a higher tax bracket, that might end up having them pay more taxes on what you wanted to give to your beneficiaries, whether that be kids, grandkids, churches, whatever it may be. I wanted to kind of highlight when you should convert your IRA, and it really comes down to these 4 things. And like I said in the beginning, I'm a fiduciary financial advisor, and if you don't have a financial advisor that is a fiduciary, I strongly suggest that you find an independent advisor, because I'm not looking to find a product or something to give me a commission to get your dollars over. I want to look at your holistic picture and make sure that it does make sense for you, because sometimes it doesn't. And you'll see in this next slide that I'm going to show you just a very simple calculator that I use with my clients to see if it does make sense. So this is a 40-year-old in a 24% tax bracket. He has a $200,000 conversion that he's looking, and in his pre-retirement and post-retirement, he's going to be spending about a 28% tax bracket. So he anticipates, this hypothetical person anticipates that he's going to be moving up a tax bracket and continuing that lifestyle in retirement. Now, obviously, there could be a lot of caveats in this, and your situation might be different, but I just wanted to show this calculator in what I use with my clients. So if we look at the start of distributions, the Roth makes sense. So the Roth is going to be the orange column, and the traditional IRA that we are thinking about converting is the blue. So whenever the value of the distribution start, the Roth is winning. The annual distribution amount, the Roth is going to be above, and the total distribution is going to be above. So for this Mr. Client, I think it's a great idea to do your distribution or your Roth conversion, even though we have to pay taxes now. So obviously, like I said, for this to make sense for somebody else, I would have to run the math for them, and I would gladly do that. There's a little gnat there. So next slide is talking about that estate planning. So I mentioned it previously, but estate planning is becoming a bigger deal because of these acts that have been passing in the last couple of years. So the act that I'm talking about is the Secure Act. This act passed and started right as COVID was starting. So some people get the Secure Act and the CARES Act. They kind of mix them together. But the Secure Act started right before COVID. And I remember working with somebody right before COVID hit, and then they were very nervous. They had to get it over once the grandfathering in stopped. So what the Secure Act says is that inherited IRAs must be distributed in 10 years. Previously, before the Secure Act, you had a lifetime to distribute those dollars. So grandpa passed it down in IRA. I'm the next beneficiary. He doesn't pass it to his wife. He just passes it to me. I have to distribute that entire IRA within 10 years. Okay, so if that's $100,000, I have to take at least $10,000 a year to make sure that I liquidate that, because any dollars left in that IRA are subject to a 50% penalty. So let's say I didn't know about this rule and I thought I had a lifetime. That $100,000 account that I didn't pull from, $50,000 of it would have gone to the government, right? This is a big deal when we're talking about estate planning, because you work to pass these dollars down and most efficiently as possible. So if we're thinking about, our estate planning and our retirement planning, we definitely need to take into account that your beneficiary's tax bracket might be higher, and them taking that out, there might be higher taxes. So if we can take your low tax bracket, convert it over, pass it to them tax-free, you don't even have to worry about that. So the next thing, just a quick idea. So whenever I'm doing these, I want to provide topics, but also little solutions here and there. So one of the ways that we do this is we do a donor advised fund. So a donor advised fund, if you haven't heard of them, is a way to basically lump sum your charitable distributions. Okay, so let's say that you give $10,000 to the ASPCA, your church, whatever it may be, every single year, and you plan on doing that at least for the next 10 years, 5 years. What we do is, instead of taking those annual deductions, we take that 10-year of $10,000 donation and we put it all into a donor advised fund up front. And what that does is that it actually scrunches together all of our deduction, so we can get a large deduction up front and then take other dollars and do a Roth conversion at a lower rate because of those deductions. So just a high level idea. Obviously, if it makes sense for you, it makes sense for you and I can help you. If it doesn't, then just forget that I talked for the last 45 seconds. So next, I want to talk about controlling your tax bracket. So I mentioned this in the title slide, but controlling your tax bracket is really where I help my clients out. Controlling your tax bracket is basically making sure that we aren't paying more taxes than we need to, and actually have a plan about liquidating your retirement assets. So here's the scenario. You require $100,000 of after-tax income to continue your lifestyle. Now, that's a great lifestyle. I want to make sure that if that's your world, or if it's not your world, I want to make sure that your plan is doing it. So we need $100,000 of after-tax income. So first, client A that I talked to, he has an IRA, an old 401k, all pre-tax dollars. What we have to do is we have to take $131,000 out of that IRA to yield that $100,000. We're paying $31,000 in taxes every year if the tax bracket stayed the same. Or client number two, he did a Roth conversion previously. So he has some funds that are in the Roth side of things that are after tax. And what we can do there is we can take 86 out of the traditional IRA or your old 401k, therefore dropping your tax bracket, take the rest of the dollars out of the Roth. So that $31,000, we only pay about $17,000 total in taxes from the 86 distribution to net us that $100,000. Now, some people are like 17,000, yeah, I mean, or the difference of 31 and 17, 14,000 in my net worth. I think $14,000 is a lot of money, and if I don't have to pay it to taxes, I'm all for that, especially for myself, but also for my clients. But the big thing is if you carry that out over a 30-year retirement, here's that difference. There's about $14,000 a year of taxes, and if we get a conservative 6% growth over those 30 years, we're going to have over $1.1 million just because of how we controlled our tax bracket. And that's where a financial advisor, a financial planner comes into play, is that they run these ideas for their clients and they're really active in making sure that we can save that. So essentially with that 1.1 million, I just gave you another 10 years of income or a free $1.1 million taxable to pass down to your beneficiaries or charities. And I would consider that a financial planning win for my clients. Next, kind of switching gears, that's all high and mighty. Love an extra $1.1 million. Wish I had it in my pocket. But now I want to talk about the pitfalls of a Roth conversion. So some things bad. So these are two scenarios that I came through just working with the industry and having some exposure to clients. So the first one, my income grew and I had contributions going into the Roth, but now I made too much. So going back to that first, or probably the third slide, talking about backdoor Roth IRAs, this happens a lot whenever I have clients that have unexpected bonuses or they get a promotion in the middle of the year and they're right at that threshold. As a single, like I said, around 120, as a married, around 205. If they have a large bonus that brings them up and they're contributing directly into a Roth, but then their adjusted gross brings them above that limit, essentially what we have to do is we have to back out all of the Roth and then put it right back in. We have to do what's called a recharacterization in those. It's not too terribly complex, but if you don't know the right person to talk to and your online broker or whoever's helping you out with this isn't super familiar with it, you might run into some issues. I had a client that reached out to me because the online portal wasn't helping her with what she needed. Next situation, I tried to do a backdoor Roth IRA or backdoor Roth and took a tax deduction on my IRA first, right? So that's the opposite of a backdoor Roth IRA. You basically just tried to kick down the front door, right? So what we have to do there is similar. We have to take, we have to pay the taxes on the traditional IRA. Then we don't get deducted, obviously. We have to pay those taxes and do basically a Roth conversion instead of a backdoor Roth IRA. So once again, very, very simple conceptually, but to file the right paperwork so you don't get dinged, because all the dollars left over of an incorrect Roth are subject to 6% taxes on top of the taxes that you have. And heaven forbid that you actually distribute the money, then you have a 10% penalty for an early withdrawal, and it can be a nightmare. Typically, it's very, very simple. So going into more pitfalls. So a lot of the times when my clients are looking to do Roth conversions or backdoor Roth IRAs and backdoor and Roth conversions in general, they don't know about what's called the pro rata rule. The pro rata rule is in Latin, so obviously it's got to be more complicated. I have a lawyer friend and he tries to impress me with all of his Latin jargon, and it just is too complicated. So I just want to explain it for people who don't have any interest in learning Latin. So what that means is that the IRAs actually exist in the aggregate, so total. So your traditional, your rollover, your Roth, your simple, anything that has a IRA at the end of it exist together. So what that means is that if you try to move over a Roth or a traditional IRA to a Roth and you have a rollover somewhere, that's going to count. So what it looks like is it actually is calculated proportionately to the total amount. Now I know these are a lot of words, so I'm going to go through an example. So let's say we have a $150,000 rollover and we have funded $6,000 non-deductible into a traditional IRA so that we can move it over into a backdoor Roth IRA. Very common situation. You left your employer after 5-10 years and you have a rollover IRA sitting there. If we wanted to do a backdoor Roth IRA, your total IRA amount would actually be $156,000. So 3.8% of that would be in that traditional. So what that means is that when converting that 6,000 IRA, 96.2% would actually be taxable. Okay, so we thought that we already paid the taxes and we moved it over, but now we're actually paying more taxes because they exist in the aggregate. So it's a tough situation to get into if you're not sure what the pro rata rule means. So how do I fix that, Dylan? Basically, there's two different ways. One, you could do a Roth conversion on the whole amount. Obviously, we'd have to pay the taxes on that, but we do, if that fits into your plan and we're not jumping too many tax brackets, it might make sense. If not, we look at our current employer's 401k. you can actually move, if a plan sponsor allows it, you can actually move that rollover into your plan sponsor 401k. Therefore, it would no longer be an IRA. Now you just have the $6,000 traditional IRA that we got to move over. So two relatively simple fixes, just depends on your current plan. Okay. Next, talking about the legislation. So like I said, I mean, there's a couple trains of thought whenever you're thinking about the legislation on Roth IRAs. Now, the Build Back Better Act, or what they're trying to pass, is filled with a lot of different financial rules that affect me and my clients. But the biggest ones that I want to talk about today, because we're in that Roth mindset, I wanted to talk about these two. So the first and foremost is the elimination for all incomes of the backdoor Roth IRA in 2022. I would say probably 15% of my job today, in these days, are doing backdoor Roth IRAs for my clients, because we just need to get them in just in case they can't. If the backdoor Roth IRA goes away in 2022, me and my clients are exploring other tax advantage options, whether it be different sorts of growth inside of your employer plan, or some sort of variable universal life, index universal life, basically an investment vehicle inside of an insurance chassis that gives us a tax deferment. Those products only make sense for a certain amount of clients. I'm not a broad insurance broker, but for some people, those might make sense. The next thing that they're talking about is the elimination of Roth conversions of high income earners in 2032. So what they're trying to do, and every legislation wants to, pat themselves on the back whenever they're in office, right? So what they're trying to do is they're trying to basically get people to either not be able to do a backdoor Roth, so they fund a brokerage account. A brokerage account is a non-qualified account that's going to get taxed along the way via dividends and distributions. Or they're trying to get people to convert their pre-tax dollars over to Roth dollars in the next 10 years, because that's a lump sum of taxes coming into the administration. And like I said, whenever you have a math problem and you're not bringing in enough income, you need to increase taxes. That's the government's thought. So the elimination of the Roth conversion. So we need to establish a plan for tax strategy to get those moved over. Obviously, if you have a high IRA from a long tenure of a career, we don't want to convert all 800,000 of it in the 1 year, because it's like you made 800,000 or whatever the number is, and we don't want to just absolutely catapult tax brackets. So we want to have a plan associated with that, and that's something that a financial advisor should and would be able to help you with. Okay, so I want to take a second just to kind of take a breath and grab a drink. If you have any questions, please just put them in there. I still see that one there, and I will take a look at that as well. Okay, so here's some submitted questions that I've gotten in this webinar and the previous one. So will a Roth conversion and gift of an IRA to children and children satisfy their requirements? So the RMD requirements. A lot of people are thinking about moving money from an IRA to a Roth IRA simply because a Roth IRA doesn't have any RMDs. And if you have no need for the dollars, then we don't need to get it taxed out. Unfortunately, if you do a Roth conversion, it will satisfy all RMD requirements. If you gift the IRA to children or grandchildren, that will fall under the gift taxes and that 10-year mark that we talked about before. Another question is, should my Roth have the same risk portfolio as my non-qualified brokerage account? And for this, obviously, risk tolerance is a big deal whenever I'm talking to my clients about investing, because I don't want to have a high risk or a highly volatile portfolio and someone who is extremely risk averse. That would not mesh well, and I wouldn't have that client for very long. So one of the first stages of my onboarding is making sure that we have the correct amount of risk standard deviation for the return that we're trying to expect. So long answer, should my Roth have the same risk portfolio? Your Roth compared to your non-qualified should actually be more aggressive, okay? And the reason why that is because it's in a Roth account, there's no taxes on the growth and there's no taxes on the distribution. So if we hit a home run in that account, we don't have any taxes owed, or if we hit that same home run in the non-qualified brokerage account, we'd have taxes on dividends and taxes on withdrawals. So if you have a Roth account, that goes for your pre-tax as well. If we can have some growth, we definitely want to have it in your qualified plans because we're not getting taxed along the way. I got this question from a physician. Should an older physician wait to look at converting until they retire in 3 to 4 years to have a lower tax bracket then? Short answer, if you plan on having a substantially lower tax bracket, absolutely. There's a couple ways that we can dive into actually targeting real estate to do a Roth conversion so that we can get the conversion now, have a deduction on those dollars so that we can grow tax-free. And then it says, when should I convert and access Roth dollars? So like I said before, and I'm sure you guys are kind of getting the hint here, I don't want to give blanket advice to anybody because that's not where I do my job well, right? That's not a good financial advisor, is not to give blanket advice. And when you should convert it depends on your total financial situation. So if you have a financial advisor, start talking to them. And if you want me to talk to you about when you should convert them, I would love to help. And when should you access Roth dollars? Typically, if we're not controlling our tax bracket, like I talked about previously, if you're just kind of going on cruise control, we would want to hold our most tax efficient dollars till the end, because that means that they're going to pass more efficiently. Okay, so the next slide is just any more questions. So I will answer this question here in a second. If you guys have any more questions, just feel free to type them in. Okay, so the question, I don't know if everybody else can see it, but and I hope that this is okay to say this out loud. I don't even know who said the question yet. So there's no, can somebody please, I'm sure because there's people still in here, that the audio was working the whole time. Because it looks like someone left in the beginning because there wasn't any audio. Yes, audio is fine. Thank you. That was, I don't know if you saw my blood leave my face thinking that I just talked for 30 minutes without anybody hearing me, but it looks like people stayed, so perfect. Okay. So the question is, I have a large standard IRA and don't need the income from the RMDs, which this year was a substantial amount. I'm 77, my wife is 71. We're at the high end of the 24% tax bracket and have many assets outside the IRAs to live on. With tax rates most likely going up and possibly future restrictions on Roth conversions, would you recommend doing it all this year and incurring a tax bill of a substantial amount? Or is there a sweet spot for doing some, if not all? Our 2 children will inherit our estate and they are already financially well off, so this would most likely put them in the highest tax bracket as well. Also, about $72,000 in one IRA was from after-tax money transferred from, it looks like, a pension plan into an IRA. Is there an easy way to get that into a Roth? So for this, I would really like to take this offline. It looks like there's some pretty finite details that I think would make more sense if we can talk one-on-one. Plus, there's a couple different options that, since you are an accredited investor, I can talk to you at a different. There's a couple different options that we have, and I can't really talk too much about that because I'm not sure the accreditation stature of everyone else. So I know that you are, looks like, very protective of your information. I have this next slide. This next slide is my contact information. So that email address, my cell phone, please feel free to call my cell phone or my office line. That QR code can get you live to my bookings page. My bookings page is essentially a way to link calendars. You can look at my calendars over the next 2-3 weeks to see if you can find a time. We can either do a video chat like we're talking today, or we can just hop on the phone for a few. And this is not just for the hypothetical or the question that I had, but this is for anybody in attendance. So it's not looking like we have any more questions. Oh, just kidding. Able to connect on the phone. Good. I'm happy that you hopefully you caught quite a bit of it. I hope so. Medicare surcharges go up when I do a Roth conversion. In general, does the tax-free growth make up for the surcharge? So that question comes down to how aggressive you are in the portfolio, and obviously and returns. So once again, to dive into Medicare surcharges for you specifically, I think it would make most sense to connect on the phone or over a video chat very quickly, and we could do some hypotheticals on a growth chart to see if it would make most sense for you. Because obviously, surcharges are not what I want you to pay. I don't want you to have that balance. But if we can make up those dollars or be a little bit more targeted about how we're doing the Roth conversions, I think it would make a lot of sense. Next question: heard someone say that Roth conversion amounts do not count towards RMDs. So let me get that back on there. So essentially, how that works. So if you don't convert all of it. So let's say you have $500,000 of an IRA and you convert $250,000 of it. That $250,000 would not satisfy the RMDs, but what it would do is now you only have distributions on the $250,000 because you wouldn't have RMDs on the Roth side now. So once again, that's where a plan comes into play, because if we're worried about RMDs, we need to start tactically doing some Roth conversions so that we can lower that RMD, that unneeded amount of RMD. So hopefully that answered that question. Thank you. You're welcome. Perfect. So what I want to do is just take a second to thank all of you guys. I loved all the questions, and it looks like I hope that you guys got something out of today. Once again, my contact information is on the screen. I would love to talk to any of you. That first meeting is obviously complimentary because I want to make sure I'm doing a good job of identifying your needs and your goals. Will this be replayed? This is one of my most successful webinars. So I'll probably do this. I probably won't do one in December just because everybody's busy with the holidays, but I'll probably pick it up at the beginning of next year to really iron out the legislation that came in. What I will say is that my marketing department will follow up in the next couple of days, and if you attended or if you registered, you'll actually get a copy of this presentation. So you can either come on to the January one and hear about the new legislation, or you can take a look and replay this. But besides that, I'm happy you guys were interactive and you and had great questions. Hopefully you guys got a lot out of it. Thank you so much for attending. And as always, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. Have a good night, everybody.